Welcome, everyone. It is 12 o'clock right on the dot Central Standard Time, so we can go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Top Insights from the Counselor's 2023 State of the Industry Report. Each year, ASI reveals insights from their Counselor State of the Industry Report. It's the single most researched report about the promotional products industry. It provides in-depth analysis on multiple topics, including trends in growth, challenges in manufacturing, industry verticals that possess the most opportunity, and much more. Today, we're going to break down this report with our great friends and the architects behind this, ASI's Michele Bell and Nate Kucsma. Hello again.
Hi.
And Nate is, just so everyone knows, this happened last year too. Nate is on vacation in the Outer Banks, and kudos to him for spending time. He'll be on a jet ski later, but he's spending time with us now to break down this report because he's such a research nerd. He loves this.
True.
I do, and it's actually, as I said to you, it gives me a chance to recover.
For vacation, right. Well, let me introduce our guests. If you don't know Michele and Nate, Michele Bell is ASI's Vice President of Editorial, Special Events, and Education with more than 30 years of journalism experience. She's been with ASI for 25 plus years and is the recipient of multiple Neal Awards. The Neal Awards are known as the Pulitzer Prize of Business Journalism. Michele also covers the overseas promo markets extensively, and ASI does a phenomenal job. They have an incredible lineup of journalists. And I just remember through the pandemic especially, they really kept our industry on point and together. So Michele, thanks for joining us today. Kudos to all your journalist team for doing such an amazing job all the time.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. And on behalf of the team, I really appreciate those kind words. Thank you.
You bet. And Nate is ASI Senior Executive Director of Research and Corporate Marketing. Nate joined ASI in March 2014, has nearly 25 years, or probably more now, Nate, of domestic international marketing research experience. He received his MBA from Rutgers, and prior to ASI, worked at Dow Jones, MetLife, and more. So welcome again, Nate.
Thank you. As always, happy to be here. And right on the heels of when this report has been released.
Yeah, it's really quick, right? Did you just release this back at the ASI show in Chicago last week, which I heard was phenomenal. I want to mention that today's webinar is brought to you by us at commonsku, and thanks to our guests for showing up today. But if you want to learn more about how to revolutionize your business and work from anywhere and create a CRM platform that powers your connected workflow, check us out at commonsku.com/demo. Also, I want to say that ASI's report, and it is such an intense and in-depth report, can be found at asicentral.com/news. We're going to break down the high points here, but there is far more to get into. So I really encourage you to go check this out again at asicentral.com. How to use today's chat. I want to mention this briefly. Everybody probably already knows it, but if you're brand new to the industry, this is a great overview. My name, by the way, is Bobby Lehue. I am the Chief Content Officer at commonsku. Prior to joining commonsku, I was a distributor for many years. We focused on e-commerce stores and shops, and I used this report every year as benchmarks for me and my team. I used it for gross profit benchmarks, what industries we weren't tackling, all kinds of things. So if you're brand new to the business, I hope this is very helpful to you. And second, if you're a pro in the business, again, this is how I would use this chat today. Benchmarks and ways for us to think about the industry as we move forward, and also some cautionary flags about kind of what's going on in the business too. But Michele, let's start with overall industry revenue. It's returned back to 2019 standards, really. We're just bumping up against 26 billion. Is there something more important there that we should realize, though, that more than just a return to normal? What are your thoughts when you saw those numbers come back? What were your thoughts?
Surprised. Nate and I always kind of have a little side bet, and he, to his credit, because he lives in this world of data, thought it was going to rival 2019, which was the record year. And I was a little bit more skeptical. Look, I think you can tie it to a robust return to events.
Yeah.
Live events coming back, a return to normalcy, things like that. But let's not forget, there's some padding in here, if you will, because of inflation and rising prices and things like that. But boy, when events came back, they came back.
Yeah, great point.
In a huge way. And he saw it before I did, but so listening to him, I was still a little surprised, but Nate wasn't.
Nate, why did you think it was going to be so robust? Just the return, the bounce back? What did you think?
You know what? Here's the thing. We measure sales, right? We don't measure products, right? So inflation was up, what, 8%, 10%, depending on when you were looking at it. So when you take into account inflationary pressures And then you take into account how quickly everybody wanted to get back to the way things were. And I think in many cases, things are back stronger than they were. I think that both of those two things played into it.
Great point. I want to start off with the macro trends first. We had you had decided in the report as a summary that there were 5 major trends that you had decided throughout all of these details. The first trend, and we'll cover each one of these real briefly, but the first trend was sustainability. Nearly 60% of distributors prefer to purchase products that are environmentally friendly. 60% is a big leap, Michele, from when we were talking about this 5 or 6 years ago. And 53% prefer products that are socially responsible, but both of these figures decreased from last year. Why is that, Michele?
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive. So you kind of have 2 competing narratives here. I would say it's a big jump from years ago. And Bobby, as you and I have talked about, certainly a big jump in the last 10 years where Europe has really dominated that trend much more so than North America. I think that it has jumped so significantly because of buyers. Buyers are younger, they're demanding more, but it's not just the younger buyers. You know, people are they see the news, they know what's going on with the climate, they know what's going on with the environment, you know, and they want to be part of the solution and not the problem. Yeah. And I think they're really driving this clearly. Distributors and suppliers are going to do what their buyers ask for. So therefore, you know, it's the buyers that are really pushing this. Why did it drop last year? Well, because people were concerned about the economy. And when people get concerned about the economy, despite the fact that they may want to buy made in the US, like after 9/11, like during COVID, they want to support their country, right? They want to buy made in Canada, made in the US. When the rubber meets the road and the economy gets hinky, you know, buyers are going to go for the less expensive items, and the sustainable, organic, recyclable items still are priced a little bit higher. And I think that's why you saw a drop, because the economy was very schizophrenic, as we all know, last year. And I think people were hedging their bets a little bit. But I think it is a trend. I don't even want to call it a trend. I think it's here to stay.
Right.
And I mean, you and I can talk about that later, of the massive implications for the industry of that. Yeah. Because I think in many ways the industry is not quite ready for what's coming.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that in a minute. Michele, tell me the website address, the web address for the sustainable efforts that you have done at ASI.
Yeah, it's asicentral.com/promo for the planet.
Awesome. It's a great site. I encourage you to check it out. Thank you for that. And by the way, as I direct questions to both of you, Phil, as you know, we do this really well together. Feel free to interrupt me if there's something you're like, wait, I want to talk about that. So Nate, next question. Second trend of 5.
You're going to ask us not to be shy and reticent?
Yeah. I know. This is why you're the best guest, right? I don't even have to say that. So second of the 5 trends, Nate, Russia orders declined. Did I read that right?
You did. And I think that, you know, pre-COVID, right, we were on a multi-year trend of people needing things faster and faster and faster. I mean, we got up to almost 4 in 10 orders being needed in 5 days or less, right? That's really fast. That's a big number. And what happened is people were forced to slow down in COVID because they couldn't get the orders in time, right?
Right, of course.
It's still true. There's still issues with staffing. Right? There's not as many supply chain issues, but there's still issues with staffing. So people sort of had to realize that you can't get things as fast as you used to. So now kind of what you have to do is people have gotten better at planning ahead. And now you have both suppliers and distributors agreeing that only about 24 to 25% of orders have a 5-day turnaround time or less, which is actually really, really significantly down from where it was. So yeah, no, I think that that's a good trend. It shows that people are preparing more, that not, I mean, obviously there's still going to be things that pop up and, you know, things that have to be done very, very quickly. But it shows that I think that's a bit of a sign of maturity for the industry, actually.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Michele.
Also, Bobby, I mean, surprise of all surprises, the poor suppliers who were using neon signs and sock puppets to communicate with the distributors, telling them to plan ahead, and that they couldn't do everything at the last minute. I think distributors got the message. Like they listened, and you know, suppliers were telling anybody who would listen, please give us enough time. We're having challenges, and I think what you're seeing there is distributors were like, okay, we get the message.
Yep, I think you're exactly right. And also think distributors were forced, maybe for the first time as a collective, to, because of the supply chain issues, shore that up with their clients. We're typically so responsive to our clients, no matter what, we'll pull it off. but I think we got proactive during COVID, like we've never been proactive before, that probably exercised a new muscle. Also, I'm noticing the trend of a production role increasing in distributors. And so there's probably now more air traffic controllers for promo in the skies than we used to have. So very interesting. By the way, we have a podcast out on the SKUcast where we just interviewed Mike Vandervoot at Paperclip Promotions about his role as a production manager. And I think that was a big part of it too. We just saw shifts happen both with inside the distributors business as they reported to their clients. Okay, third trend. This was surprising to me somewhat. Work stress levels increased. 53% of distributors said their work stress levels increased. I've heard that more and more. And I'm going to ask this audience question in the chat. Why do you think stress levels have increased, or has your stress level increased? UPS didn't go on strike, so that was one thing we didn't have to worry about. But Michele, why do you think these stress levels have increased post-COVID?
Well, Bobby, let me run down the myriad reasons why. I mean, we had a once in a lifetime global pandemic, a war in Ukraine, an economy that was all over the place.
Yeah.
We have political issues, pick a reason. And I think, people were just beaten down. Nate will point out correctly, this is the first time we asked this question in State of the Industry. And when he came to me and said, I want to ask this, I thought, well, that's really interesting because it's a more esoteric kind of topic rather than just straight business. Mm-hmm. But for sure, it impacts everybody's business. The amount of time lost as far as labor to people who stay home because of stress-related illness is significant. And when you talk about owners of companies, whether they're small companies, mom and pops, or the large ones, the Herculean task of running a business during the past 3 years, is enough to make even the most sturdy person crawl up in the fetal position,
Yeah. Nate, as the research lead on this, was this, how did you come to the decision to include this, and what were your thoughts as you got the return?
Well, this is a big study, right? Obviously, and this is a study that's been going on now for north of 20 years. So you want to kind of get a pulse on the industry. And I got the sense in talking to our members, whether it was at our trade shows or just interacting with them, that there's a lot of pressures that otherwise that might not have been there 2 or 3 years ago, right? 2 or 3 years ago, people were not concerned about staffing issues. We sure as heck weren't concerned about, inflation. We weren't concerned about supply chain issues, at least as widespread as they are now. So I'm listening to our members. I'm listening to what their challenges are. I'm like, all of these have to have a cumulative effect on something. So let me just try to see if I'm reading this right. If I'm hearing what people are feeling, and that's really the goal. And I think I was here. And I can say that, right? It's easy to say, people are more stressed. But to actually go out there and have people actually tell you that that's true, it was stunning that it was as high of a number as it was, honestly.
Yeah, and 4 out of 5 of the responses in the chat have to do with labor and turnover, or labor and shortage, turnover of labor. The fourth trend that I want to mention is that globally M&A slowed down in 2022, according to S&P Global, but in our industry, M&A is still going strong. So mergers and acquisitions are still going strong. Michele, this is a topic that you have always been on top of. Do you feel like as we head into what seems now not near a dire as an economy, I dare say that this will pick up? I mean, historically, M&A activity declined when our industry was on the upswing, if I don't recall right. But what are your thoughts on that?
So here's what I would say. Just in Chicago last week, one top 40 supplier and one top 40 distributor pulled me aside and said, we want to buy, keep your ears open. We're anxious to buy. We want to expand. Just last week.
Wow. So
I would say, based on people that I talk to, that within the industry, I think people are very acquisitive. People during COVID, especially the smaller companies, were more apt to look to sell because it was just, I think, so overwhelming to many companies. Where you're seeing things slow down, Bobby, is at the private equity level. I think that as far as private equity acquisitions, the money just isn't quite there yet because of a very nervous economy, right? People are still nervous about the economy. So there are quite a few large companies in the industry that are held by private equity that are due to be sold. They were due to be sold during COVID because, they usually turn over in 3 to 5 years. So they're late being sold. I mean, the two that leap to mind, of course, are Halo and Polyconcept. But, I don't know when that'll happen because, as they say, the money just isn't in the street right now as far as private equity. Yeah. So, I don't pretend to know what they're doing behind the scenes, but I do know that that's more delayed. People in our industry, the bigger companies who tend to get calls all the time from private equity, they're not quite back to where they were before COVID as far as the interest in companies of that size. But what's interesting to me is where you're seeing activity or interest is one company in our industry buying another, not private equity related.
Yeah. Interesting. Morgan Stanley predicted in the second half of this year that M&A activity will pick up just globally overall. The final trend I want to talk about, and this is fascinating to me. Of course, I'm a distributor, at heart. Distributors are expanding into 3 different areas. They're expanding into company stores and shops. They're expanding into warehousing and fulfillment, and they're expanding into different marketing services. But I don't know that I've ever seen the shops, company stores number jump near as high as I did this year, Michele. When 4imprint came on the scene, we all thought that was the future of e-commerce. We thought that's the way it's going to look. And it wasn't. It seemed as though every brand wanted to have their own boutique shop experience. Did it surprise you how much this year's number increased?
It did. And Nate and I talked about it because, there's when things look like outliers to us, he and I and CJ Minica have a conversation like, well, what's happening here? What are we not seeing? And I think what we came to, and this lines up for me based on what I hear anecdotally in the industry, buyers, the clients of our distributors are looking for more curated experiences to very specific segments of their clients. So therefore, if distributors can do that and maybe curate a company store that's just to their Gen Z staffers or their Gen Z prospects and maybe female Gen Z, they're doing a much better job pulling in a very targeted, and boy, data and analytics are a wonderful thing. I mean, the amount of things that you can scrape now as far as what buyers really want as far as products and colors and styles. And I think they're doing a much better job curating things than a broad-based kind of 4imprint. Yeah. Here's everything.
Right. Nate, what were your thoughts as you came back, this report came back so strong on this particular area?
Yeah, I believe that I agree with everything Michele said, but I also think that we're living in an area where people want things as customized as possible. And they want to be able to purchase things as easily as possible. And let's be honest, during COVID, everybody got used to being able to buy everything online, and people value being able to show the brands that they're wearing, whether it's a school, whether it's employer, whatever it is. And if they can buy it and sort of select it on their own and pay for it on their own, I think that the company stores make that much easier to do. Listen, there's some good solutions out there for them as well.
When I asked Dale Denham, CEO at PPAI, and both of whom we all know, friends with all of us, I asked him what he saw was the number one trend happening in the industry, and it was this. It was these boutique shops. And then, Michele, you'll find this interesting that, when I did stores, we did stores back in the day, and the three J's, January, June, and July, were the softest months for us. At commonsku's, with our shops, we have seen an increase every single month, and July was the biggest month yet. And typically, July tanks with e-commerce shops and stores. So it's really interesting what's happening across the board.
Do you think it's because of it as a ramp up to schools? Is it tied to the school year starting?
It could be, because we'll get into this in a minute, the educational market being so big, but we've typically seen a softer time during this quarter for shop activity, period. And that was my experience too. But I think overall, I think people have both. The ASI is a good example, and commonsku is a good example. Technologists have made this a little easier for folks, and we have also now. I think the typical salesperson can do this type of shop so much easier. But we'll move on to our next topic. The first billion-dollar businesses. Michele, this has been an interesting one coming for a long time, but both 4imprint and Halo exceeded the billion-dollar mark, and the top 40 distributors now comprise nearly 40% of overall reported ASI's industry sales. Are we seeing the industry change in terms of demographic representation, Michele? And the reason why I ask this to you too is because are you at ASI seeing a massive influx of smaller distributors? How do you think the market demographics changing?
So 2 things. So I happened to be overseas at the PSI show when both the announcements came out about the companies hitting $1 billion. And because the scale of the industry is much smaller in Europe, I was at a breakfast and literally the breaking news, Chris Ruvo's breaking news came through, and people at the table I was with saw it, a bunch of Europeans, and they just can't fathom that we have $2 billion distributorships,
Right.
let alone the $3 billion supplier companies, right? So it's just the scale of it is mind-boggling to them. As far as the demographics, it's interesting. There are still so many newer, the bulk of ASI's business is the small distributor companies. It's the companies that are under $1 million. And there is an influx of them every month when I see on the report. I mean, they are coming as fast and furious as ever. And I think it's always the same thing, Bobby. It's the barrier. It's an easy entry, especially for moms. It's easy for them. It's flexible. So that has not waned. Whatever slowdown happened during COVID, it has really come back in the past 9 to 12 months, I would say.
Yeah. Nate, what are your thoughts as you look at the demographic now and how this is changing? You've been looking at this top 40 list and these distributor numbers for a long time. Is there anything unique about what's happening crossing this threshold, or is this somewhat expected? What are your thoughts?
No, I don't think it's unexpected. I don't know that it's expected or unexpected, honestly. I think it's just the natural flow of business. I think you have a lot of distributors that were pushed out, and I don't want to say pushed out, it comes a negative connotation, but many retired during the last 2 or 3 years. I think that, the baby boomer generation is reaching or way past retirement age. So if they were hanging out and they were still running their business over the last 3 years, they started to retire or sell their business. So I do think you have a younger demographic coming in. I think that this industry, when I joined it was older than other industries that I had been involved in the past. So I do think you see a younger generation coming in. I think you see I think the younger generation is going to be more aggressive than the people that have retired. I think what I often heard is people, when they got to a certain age, they were okay with their business. They were not looking to actively grow. So I think as you get a younger demographic and younger distributor demographic, you're going to start seeing companies that are going to be trying to grow more aggressively than we might have seen in the past.
Hey, Bobby. So
Yes.
Bobby, recently I've met 3 different young women, like young under the age of 35, I would say. 3 different who just started their own distributorship. So 3 different distributorships owned by 3 young women. So that to me is fantastic. That's a noticeable turn and win from when you and I first started in the industry, where you would not have seen that. So
yeah, we have all seen this demographic change in the past probably 5 to 7 years, I would say. It's been phenomenal to see.
Yeah.
The one thing that the report does really well, that's something that you do in your research really well, is you uncover the top challenges that both distributors and suppliers are facing. Let's look at each of these real fast. Distributor challenges, top 3 challenges by size, by demographic, showed that you had all these different aspects about a distributor's challenge, from just paying the bills to growing their business. What I want to point out, though, and get to is that out of all of these challenges, from small distributors to medium-sized distributors to large distributors, there's one commonality they all share across each category and size, and that was increasing the size of their client base. This is, correct me if I'm wrong, Michele, this has traditionally been a problem for distributors, meaning a challenge, right? Or is this unique post-COVID?
no, I don't think, I mean, Nate would actually know better than I, but I don't think it's unique post-COVID. I mean, they're always looking for creative ways. And boy, I've heard some really creative ones that the writers found when they were writing this report, where people are starting to look in. Mike Wolf, actually from Zorch, when I wrote his top 40 profile, he's the one, he said, we look at industries that are ancillary to us, the transportation industry. And we look for people that kind of get what we do, and we target them. So, they're finding new and different ways to slice and dice how they're finding clients, which I think is an interesting way to do it.
Yeah. Nate, was there anything new in this year's research about what distributors are struggling with that you uncovered?
No, it changes though, right? It changes from year to year. During COVID, increasing the size of their customer base wasn't necessarily it. It was literally trying to stay in business and remain profitable with the customers they had. But no, I think that, earlier to what I mentioned about, we're entering this phase where you have these new business owners that are coming in with a very aggressive growth mindset. That's what they're looking to do. It's a challenge, but it's also a goal of theirs. So No, I don't think it's anything new. This has been traditionally pre-COVID one of, by far one of the biggest challenges people had, and I think they're like Michele said, looking at new and exciting ways for how to do this.
Yeah. Let's move to supplier challenges, because all three of us feel this way. Our suppliers in this industry run some of the most complex businesses on planet Earth. They have to deal with everything from manufacturing to overseas to labor challenges and supply chain and all of that. Michele, one thing you mentioned, here are the three, by the way, the three challenges for suppliers by their supplier size. Sustainability. You mentioned that suppliers are really having a hard time keeping up with demand overall as an aggregate, right? I mean, we've seen some tremendous progress in this industry, so I want to put that out as a caveat.
For sure.
But can you share how complex this problem has grown for suppliers, because you have a very unique supplier perspective?
Sure. So as I always say, Nate brings the data, but I can bring anecdotal color because I talk to people in the industry every day, all day. So here's the problem. So recently I talked to two different top 5 distributors who their clients are demanding, just unprecedented account of, we want to know the carbon offset and the carbon data for every promotional product order we place. And we want proof of sustainability. And we want, voluminous amounts of data that's, evidentiary that they want to be able to track. Right. And so my two friends at these two different distributors, they said, our supply chain in this industry is not set up for this at this point. Yes, maybe the biggest suppliers can do some of this, but what they want suppliers to be able to do is impossible. And once you get past like the top 40 companies, the amount of resources and time, and you've got to have dedicated staff to this. It's almost, no pun intended, unsustainable and untenable.
Yeah.
Yet this is what the biggest, so when you look at like the Fortune 500, the Fortune 50, that is what they are demanding of their clients who are our biggest distributors in the industry. So when my distributor friends say, we've got a problem here because this industry is not set up for it. If you compare it, Bobby, to product safety a couple of years ago, you remember QCA was a thing, and people were able to send people into factories in China and do reports. This is a much different kettle of fish because, they really want things that my distributor friends will say, they don't even know if you can track these things, but the clients want to be able to check boxes on the reports for their shareholders and their clients to say, we've asked for proof of these things. And, at this point, like one of my friends said, it's just giving them a reason not to use promo if you don't come to the table with every bit of information they want. But these poor suppliers who are going to have to try to provide this. Yeah. It's really, again, it's untenable for many of them.
I'm going to move past a few topics here, but one of the common challenges that suppliers have seen also is just competition in their own category. But let's skip ahead to, there's one thing I want to cover before I get to China sourcing and Michele, and that is order accuracy. Last year, that was a really, really big deal. Last year was the lowest in 5 years. This year, it bumped back up to 88%. Is that still a concerning number to you?
Are you high? Of course it's concerning to me, Bobby. Of course it's concerning. Which conversely, that means 12% have order errors. I mean, yes. Again, let's give people a reason not to use promo if their orders are coming in with errors and not on time. I mean, yes, it's better than last year, but 12% of orders are showing up with errors. Yeah, it's concerning.
It's a great point. Sourcing outside of China.
I mean, I was going to answer.
Go ahead, Nate.
I was going to answer for Michele on that one because it's true. Because when you look at it, if you think about it from a distributor point of view, that means 12% of their clients are not going to have a great experience. Yeah, that's we're talking about people's businesses, their livelihood. That's a big number, and it's not all suppliers' fault, right? I want to make that clear.
Sure,
there's other that's what I don't want to like turn this into a supplier bashing because it's not meant to be. It's an industry thing. But that's something that 12% is still way too high. Yeah, it's something we battle every day. We both have technology products, and it's something that we've been trying to solve since we started and have made a lot of progress in terms of connected workflow and connected suppliers. But it is the number one challenge because it's not just 12% of their client base. You can lose a $100,000 client over a $1,000 order. So it's a very big problem in the industry. Sourcing outside of China, this is your unique expertise in particular. We have been hearing a lot of sort of saber rattling around decoupling from China and things like that, but this was an interesting chart. What are you hearing anecdotally from suppliers about move from China, Michele?
Yes, gather around, kids, while I get up in my high horse and talk about
Okay,
how much we
right.
need to get out of China. Again, I never think it's a smart idea to have all of our eggs in one basket, the basket being China. Most of the products are still imported from China, and of course, it's because of their vast infrastructure. One of the figures of the state of the industry this year in its totality that surprised me was the 21% for Vietnam. What surprised me about it is, I don't know why it surprised me, because suppliers are extraordinarily nimble and they can pivot quickly, but it's impressive how quickly they're starting to pull at least part of their business outside of China to move it in places like Vietnam. It's very smart of them. Vietnam just had its first promo trade show this past April. And I know some people who went and they were impressed. Of course, nowhere near the scale of the China show in Canton or the Hong Kong show, but impressive for a first outing. I'm going to go to the show next April because I want to see if Vietnam can do what they say they can do. I want to go into some factories and, just kind of see what their manufacturing is like. Look, China's got its own set of issues. Its population, is decreasing. People, much like people here in the US, their young people do not want to work in factories. They want, other opportunities, not like their parents. They don't want to work 18 hours a day in factories. So the foothold that it once had is definitely more shaky. So it's interesting to see, Mexico, of course, you look here, Bobby, 10%. The nearshoring trend is a real thing. I think people are looking for areas closer to us too, closer to the US and Canada.
Nate, did this report yield, with the Vietnam was big, did it yield any other surprises for you?
No, I think, the movement away from China, we were waiting for even pre-COVID, to be honest with you. And there was a large movement, especially after COVID or during COVID, I guess, and then with all the supply chain issues. I don't want to say I'm surprised it hasn't accelerated more. There's always been this wish, there's always been this belief, I think, that it's going to accelerate and that there's going to be more movement away. It's going to be interesting if that actually follows through, especially as things return to a level of normalcy, right? Yeah. Because there are still cost implications for moving away from China. There's the fact that we know how to do business with our the companies in China. And it's going to be interesting for me to see, not so much this year, but in future years, whether or not this trend continues and at what level does it continue? Is it going to plateau or is it going to continue to accelerate? I'm not really sure. I'm skeptical of it, actually.
Yeah,
I'm not. I think it's going to accelerate. I think people smartly want to diversify. The problem, Bobby, is that there are certain materials that are easier to get in China, aluminum being one of them, drinkware and such. So it's not an easy thing. Like CJ Schmidt, I think, from HIT has done a fantastic job diversifying his where he imports his products from. But he's got a vast network behind him and he's got a lot of resources. Again, if you're a smaller distributor, a supplier, or a mid-sized supplier, it's not as easy to move everything out of China to someplace else.
Yeah.
And this is not going to be the last time Michele and I disagree about anything, I assure you. I agree. That's why I love the relationship, because I agree with her that it's smart to diversify. I do. Completely. I've always believed that. It's easier in theory than practice. And that's where I'm interested to go see if the theory actually holds true.
Yeah. Moving on, as a distributor, one of my favorite reports is who's buying promo, and the education was obviously always the top market. Nonprofit increased. That was a little bit of a surprise for me, at least. Michele, was that a surprise to you?
Yes, until I thought about it, until Nate and I talked about it. And when you kind of peel back the layers, again, I think because of the shaky economy, people pulled back on their donations to different charitable events. And smartly, what do nonprofits do? They lean into things like T-shirts. And I donate to Reporters Without Borders and the ACLU and things. And they always send promo. They're smart. I mean, they're one of the best buyers of promo. And I think they ramped up those efforts when donations started to pull back. I mean, I tie it to when people donate less, boy, do those sad little commercials of those poor little pets with Sarah McLachlan playing in the background. They ramp up, and you get a tote bag or something when you donate. You got Sarah McLachlan paying 24/7 with those sad little shaking dogs.
Yeah. You mentioned also, Michelle, the T-shirts, the top, this 17% that T-shirts are of this industry. This shouldn't be surprising post-COVID because we all sort of got casual and we threw away the ties and all those things that took us to the office. But this category really spiked. Average gross profit margins for distributors reached 36% in 2022, the highest since 2019. Nate, what do you make of that?
What I make for it is that distributors are properly passing on price increases, and in some cases even expanding their profit margins beyond what they had done in the past. I mean, when I first joined this industry, Bobby, back in 2014, I would be talking to some distributors and focus groups, and they would say, if the cost of a pen I'm selling goes up 2 cents, I might lose my customer. That's not the case anymore, by and large, for any products. People have become accustomed to paying higher prices for, I think, just about everything in life.
Well, and for quality,
I think that,
right?
you know, when you think about how quality brand, but also just in general for anything. You know, if I go someplace and they say, oh, you know, our price, I see the prices are up 10% year over year, or the last time I was there even, I'm going to be like, yeah, okay, I kind of get it. So I think what you see is that distributors, whereas in the past, they might not have been afraid to pass on cost increases, are now doing so. I think it's a, honestly, God, I think it's a great sign for the industry.
I want to mention one thing about suppliers costs that your report showed costs having continued to increase, labor costs, raw material costs, elevated manufacturing investments. For suppliers, order value increased. So it's the 8th consecutive year that order average has been increased by suppliers, but profit margin fell for suppliers. And so while distributors experienced a rise in margin, suppliers experienced a decline. What do you think has had the biggest impact on their margins? Labor post-COVID?
Oh, for sure. I think labor and raw materials, and look, you can tack in there as like the trifecta of bad news for them is, you know, having to do things about sustainability and to shore up their sustainability offerings and things like that. But labor is just unbelievable. I think one study we did showed that suppliers are paying 20% more to many.
Yeah, it was right around that. Yeah.
Wow.
You know, and good for them. I mean, they're trying to, I think, hold the line as much as they can without passing that along to distributors, which I think is why you see their profit margin is not as robust as distributors. And then raw materials, of course, you know, things coming from overseas are just skyrocketing. The one thing I would say, Bobby, in this chart that, you know, that surprised me is I keep waiting for drinkware to kind of level off. And
never does.
Still no. So I pulled a figure. So it has increased its market share has increased 94% since 2008. Like, wow, it really is kind of the success story of the industry.
That's interesting. Yeah, very interesting. We only have a few more minutes left, and I want to get your final thoughts as we wrap up here. But one thing, I don't know that I've seen this in a report before, maybe it was there and I just missed it, but the average number of orders for distributors was around 335 orders. I think that's an interesting benchmark. I think an average order, you've always reported on the average order size in terms of dollar volume, but the average order being around 335 to me gives me a benchmark as a distributor for, okay, I'm going to go compare how my numbers are and how that looks and what our order average is. Nate, was that a number you've always reported on?
We've always studied it, right? We've always studied it, but we don't always report it. There's a lot of data that we don't always report, just because we, you know, like with a webinar you're doing, you have to pick and choose what you think is going to be most important for people to know.
Right.
What I would say though is you can look at it as a benchmark, especially if you're a new business starting out. But what I would say is when you're talking about what are the KPIs that your business should measure, what are the key performance indicators, people look at things like sales, they should be looking at things like profit margin, also look at number of clients and number of orders. Those are the things that you know, sort of from year to year. So you want to see if you're improving. So from a distributor point of view, obviously a distributor that has, you know, $10 million a year is doing a lot more, well, probably, right, than 300 and some orders. But I would say use that as a benchmark. Understand that if that's the, you know, sort of base number of orders, look at how, you know, where you're at now, and then try to get, you're tracking that. Don't only track profit and revenue.
We're
Nate,
losing Nate a little bit.
You're freezing in the taco shack or wherever you are on vacation.
But we're wrapping up anyways, Nate. So it works out fine. We have
Sorry about
just
that.
one more minute here, Nate. I think we're back with you. So as we wrap, was there something more unique this year that stood out than any other year? Like, what sticks in your mind where you were done with this report and you thought, wow, that's really different than we've ever had?
The size of the apparel market and the profit margin rise to numbers that we haven't seen before. Those were the two big things. Apparel's been growing, but it really has taken off in the last couple of years.
Okay. And Michele, we've seen a lot of years together in this business. So I have a twofold question for you. What surprised you most from this year's results? And are you more optimistic or less about our industry's future, given the rise of popularity in branded merch, but also the headwinds around the sustainability and some global economy impact? What are your thoughts as we wrap up here?
So the two things that surprised me were even though it dropped a little bit, the enthusiasm for sustainable items. I think that's continuing and growing, and frankly, long overdue in this industry. And the amount of suppliers who are looking for places outside of China to source. I think it's a very easy thing, and I certainly am guilty of this, of painting generational demographics with a broad brush. So it's very easy to say young buyers don't like promo because they think it's landfill and they don't buy the sustainability argument, blah, blah, blah. And I think I shared with you, Bobby, I've got two interns who are lovely this summer, Riley and Sienna. And it's the tale of two interns, because Sienna, said to me, and not in a snarky or confrontational way, she said, like, I don't, like, who would need another pen? Who would need another item of drinkware? So she's that person who, is the future buyer who may give pushback to some of our distributor friends looking to sell promo. And she may say, I don't buy into promo because to me, it's just destined for landfill. And I'd rather give my people experiences or parties or whatever. And then I've got Riley. And Riley went to see Taylor Swift in Missouri and couldn't get her hands on merch fast enough. Loves everything about promo. So it's easy to say, well, the younger, demographics have issues with promo not being sustainable. That's not necessarily true. I think that there's still a market for it. People still love it. I think that we're this industry where I'm a little
fast,
bit.
but I hear you, Michele. I can finish that story. As we wrap here, I just want to say from there, Michele, but I was just saying thank you. I finished your story for you just in case the tech, maybe it's just my end, but I love that story. I do think it's the existential crisis that's facing the new buyers that exist. They love merch and yet they have somewhat of a challenge with it at the same time, but it's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Michele, thank you for being here. Nate, thank you both for taking the time out to do this. And Nate, I hope that the ride on the jet ski is a lot smoother than the interview. Yeah, and as we wrap, I want to share with folks, you can find this study and the details at asicentral.com/news. Also, I want to let you know about SKUCon coming up. SKUCon, you can pre-register for SKUCon. That's coming up in January. But thank you, my friends. I always enjoy this every year, and I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having us.
You bet. Take care.
Thanks, Bobby.